Today will be part 28 in the series Scriptures Often Ignored. And today we're going to be focusing on more of the least commandments as well as learning more of the least commandments. And if you missed part 1 to this, you can watch part 1 below, which I will link in the description box. But we're here in Matthew or Matthew chapter 5 because the Messiah Yahusha even speaks about the least commandments as well as keeping the commandments and no, the law was not done away with. And so we're going to be reading from verses 17 through 20. And because this is a truth network, we use the restored set apart Hebrew names for our Father Yahuwah and his true Son, the Messiah Yahusha. And it even says, the Messiah himself says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And this is according to the word of the Messiah Yahusha. For verily I say unto you, till heaven or Shamayim and Arat's earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." Well, all has yet to be fulfilled, so therefore the law is still in effect. But let's keep going. "Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of Shamayim or heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them," notice how it says do and teach them, "the same shall be called great in the kingdom of Shamayim or heaven. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven," or Shamayim. And verse 20 is specifically talking about the scribes and Pharisees, those who make up their own laws and their own traditions and put those traditions in place of or above the law, statutes, and commandments of our Father, such as these pagan holidays as well as many others. And I hope you're seeing that with both your eyes open, as well as those who preach and say that the law is done away with when this is simply not the case. Now, I've already gone over this in part 1, but I would just like to reiterate it once again for this video, which talks about in Numbers or Bamidbar chapter 15, verses 38 through 40, which talks about wearing tzitzit or tassels, which is what you see right here, to remind you of the law, statutes, and commandments of our Father Yahuwah. And in that video, part 1, we also talked about the dietary laws as well, and we talked about the importance of keeping the dietary laws, such as no pork, no shellfish, no crab, no lobster. If you're going to eat fish, it has to have fins and scales, such as salmon, which means no catfish either. And of course, we talked about that more in detail. And if you would like to watch that, you can definitely watch it below. But we also talked about in part 1 wearing tassels as well. And we're going to go over more of the commandments and some more of the least commandments so you can see them and so that you can see what Scripture is talking about, but so that you can also see the word of our Father. Because remember, let Yahuwah be the truth and let every man be a lie. And that is why we're here in Deuteronomy or Dabarim chapter 18, and we're going to be reading verses 9 through 14 together so we can get a better understanding of these least commandments and the commandments in general and the Torah in general. Now it also says, "When thou art come into the land which Yahuwah thy Elohim giveth thee," and remember, this is a truth network, so that's why we're using the restored set apart Hebrew names. But another way to pronounce Elohim is Allahim in the Hebrew. "Thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto Yahuwah, and because of these abominations Yahuwah thy Elohim doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with Yahuwah thy Elohim, for these nations which thou shalt possess hearken unto observers of times and unto diviners, but as for thee, Yahuwah thy Elohim hath not suffered thee to do so." And this is so important. And also it's important in verse 13 when it says thou shalt be perfect. I know religion and I know Christianity specifically has taught you that, oh, it's impossible to be perfect. Well, when you look up the definition of sin, the definition of of sin is transgression of the law. So if you're keeping the law, if you're following the law, statutes, and commandments, and you're learning the law, and you're keeping Torah, well, then you are perfect in the eyes of our Father. And it's important that we see that and understand that. But it's also important that we see what Scripture is talking about, especially in these verses right here, because when it says not to use divination or observe times, or not to be associated with enchantments or witches or charmers or consulting with familiar spirits, that is exactly what that's talking about. But we even see that going on today, because when it even says that there shall not make his sons or his daughters pass through the father, well, we see that going on today, because newsflash, your elite are doing that, and the elite are doing that when they do that, and when they sacrifice to Molech the owl, when they go to the Bohemian Grove, which is going on right now. And when it talks about divination, observing times, of course that's talking about astrology, horoscopes, zodiacs, and all that stuff. That's what that's talking about. When it's talking about enchanting or a witch, well, that's when you're consulting tarot card readers and psyches and all of that, palm readers. That is exactly what that's talking about. So we see that these things are even going on today. And when it's talking about charmers or consulting with familiar spirits or wizardry or necromancers, that's also talking about Ouija boards and consulting with wizardry and all that witchcraft as well. But we see that these things are abominations, especially if you're trying to predict the future and crystal balls and everything. That too is abomination, because why do you need to do that when our Father Yahuwah, he's the beginning and the end? He knows the time. He's even made the time. So you don't need to do that to observe times. You don't need to predict the future, when you can just go to Yahuwah and he can tell you his secrets when you're seeking his word. And he's also given us the sun, moon, and the stars to help us observe the seasons and the times as well, which is also written in the Torah too. So therefore we don't need to go to man to do that, because remember, let Yahuwah be the truth and let every man be a lie. And like I said, hopefully this is making sense, but I already went over this in part 1 by Leviticus chapter 20, and if you have not seen it, I will link it below so you can see it. But we're just going to go over briefly verses 22 to 26, and like I said in part 1, I went over more of this, but you will even see that it says here, ye shall therefore, and this is Yahuwah speaking by the way, ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments and do them, that the land whither I bring you to dwell therein spew you not out. And of course he's talking to the biblical Israelites, who were black by the way, but it goes on to say, and ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. But I've said unto you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am Yahuwah your Elohim, which have separated you from other people. Ye shall therefore put difference between clean beasts and unclean, and between unclean fowls and clean, and ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by fowl or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall therefore be set apart unto me, for I Yahuwah am set apart, and have severed you from other people, and that ye should be mine. A man also or woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. So we see right here that Yahuwah not only gives the children of Yahshua all the law and reinstitutes the law for us today, he not only gives us the law to put a difference between clean and unclean, but so that we can also be made perfect in the eyes of our Father, to put a difference between clean and unclean, as well as a difference between set apart and unset apart, as well as a difference between righteous and unrighteous, because we know our Father Yahuwah in heaven is clean, righteous, and set apart. And we also see in verse 25 specifically that he says, put difference between clean beasts and unclean, and between unclean fowls and clean. And we see that specifically in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 11, as well as Deuteronomy, Dabarim chapter 14, where our Father speaks about the clean and unclean beasts. And we even see more of that in foods that can be eaten, as well as foods that cannot be eaten, also known as the dietary laws. But we even also see that too, where our Father talks about that there is to be no bestiality either, where man nor women are to be having sex with animals, because that is an abomination as well. So we see exactly what is clean and unclean for our Father in his eyes. And I know we've already talked about this specifically with the tassels in Bamidbar or Numbers chapter 15, but there's another part that I would like to look at in verses 39 that is very important and is important for all of us when it comes to learning the law, statutes, and commandments of our Father. And it's right here where it even talks about the fringes in the seat that we went over earlier. But another part that it also talks about here in verses 39 is this part, and this is the part that I would like to look at. And it says, and that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye used to go a whoring, that ye may remember and do all my commandments and be set apart unto your Elohim, which is Yahuwah. Because remember, he's set apart, and he puts a difference between set apart and unset apart. But this part is so important, and the reason this part is important is because our Father Yahuwah tells us that we are not to seek after our own heart and our own eyes, but rather we are to seek and do what's pleasing unto our Father in the things that pertaineth unto our Father. Because even Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 9 says that the heart is deceitful above all things and is desperately wicked. So when people say, oh, but the heart wants what the heart wants, and when people say, oh, but the Father knows my heart, well, be very careful, because even scripture tells us that the heart is very deceitful, and we are not to go after the pleasures of our own heart, but rather after what Yahuwah wants us to go after, and rather going after Yahuwah, because even scripture tells us that we are to love Yahuwah with all our hearts and all our minds and with all our souls. And you can find that in the Shama, which is Dabarim or Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 through 9. And another good place is Shamut or Exodus chapter 23, which is even in verses 13, which we're going to read together. And it says, and in all things that I've said unto you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. And it's so important because even Yahuwah commands us not to even mention the names of other mighty ones, and not to even mention those names or let them be heard out of our mouths. And it's so important that we get this, and that is why I'm really reiterating and stressing the importance of using and calling upon the name of our Father Yahuwah, and getting away from these pagan titles such as Lord and God and Jesus, getting away from all of that, but using the restored set apart name of our Father, because even scripture says, even Shamut 20 says, that our Father will not hold them guiltless who take his name in vain. So it's important that we continue to use his name and call upon his name and just trust in his name. If you're new to this, and if you're new to this channel, and maybe you're just learning to use his name Yahuwah, the restored set apart name, well, when you start to use that name and trust in Yahuwah, just know that he will reveal his truth unto you, because even scripture says, let Yahuwah be the truth and let every man be a lie, and do not be deceived anymore. And the last place that we will be going to today is Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 19, and we're going to be reading verses 4. And it even says, turn ye not unto idols, nor make to yourselves molten mighty ones. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Now it's just interesting and ironic because yes, the King James Version breaks commandments when you see Lord here, because newsflash, the name of our Father Yahuwah was in fact written in scripture, but then what did the translators and the Zionists through the Masoretes, what did they do? Well, they came into the scripture and they took out the name of our Father Yahuwah, as well as the Hebrew name of our Messiah Yahusha, and all of the Hebrew names of the prophets. They took out those names and they replaced them with Lord and God and Jesus, and then they told you that it was okay to use these names, and that our Father would be okay with you using these pagan titles. When you even look up these pagan titles, you'll see that they have to do with calling on the names of Baal, literally. And it's important that you see that, and it's important that you see just how much things have been twisted, just how much things have been hidden from you, because then you start to see the truth. Because even our Father says in verses 4, turn ye not unto idols. And remember, idols doesn't just have to be religious idols such as JC and Mary and Buddha and Krishna and all those other ones. It's not just idols having to do with religion, but it's also idols such as celebrities, music, toys, money, gossip, those can become idols if you're not careful. And if you're not careful, they can become your idols and they can start to consume your life. For example, if you have posters of celebrities, if you have posters of pop stars and posters of celebrities and musicians, that can be a form of idolatry. If you put anything above our Father Yahuwah, that can be a form of idolatry. And it's important that we see that because that is exactly what that is. Remember, Yahuwah, our Father, is a jealous all. He even says that in Shamut, or Exodus chapter 20. So we have to be really aware of that and be very careful to make sure that we're not putting anything above our Father, because anything that's placed over our Father Yahuwah, whether that be money or toys or gossip or celebrities, music, games, whatever the case is, that can be a form of idolatry. And I hope you see that with both your eyes open. And speaking of idolatry, if you're ready to abandon all of these watered down translations of scripture, if you're ready to abandon the King James Version because you're tired of seeing Lord and God written in the scripture, then I highly recommend the Sefer. Now, what's good about the Sefer is that it's a comprehensive restoration of sacred scripture in the English language. And what's also good about the Sefer is that you will find the name of our Father Yahuwah as well as the Messiah Yahusha. You will find the restored, set apart Hebrew names written in scripture. And what's also good about it is that it can help you get further acquainted with the Hebrew, as well as learning the Hebrew, as well as learning more about our Father and the Messiah and seeing their names in scripture. But what's also good about the Sefer is that it even includes books that were previously canonized as scripture that were taken out, books such as Enoch and Jubilees and many more. It even includes a Hebrew to English chart of the most common names and places, as well as the Hebrew alphabet, and even charts and different maps that can help you out on your spiritual walk and journey into truth. Now, although it is on the pricey side, if you enter in the coupon code Truth Unveiled, so if you just put in the coupon code Truth Unveiled, no 777, you will receive 10% off your purchase. Again, that coupon code is Truth Unveiled, and I will be sure to leave all of the helpful links in the description box below. And if you're ready to get even closer to our Father Yahuwah, and if you're looking for some really good Yahuwah music, then I highly recommend Hadar Batya Set Apart Heart, where you can get even more music and motivation for your spiritual walk and journey. And like I said, I'll leave all of the helpful information in the description box below. Hopefully this has been helpful unto you. This is Truth Unveiled here saying once again, peace, love, and as always, shalom.